know how sometimes you feel like your head's full of those prison movie cliches? Well, get ready to hit the mental reset button because we are diving into the life story of reformed London gangster Yammy B.
Right.
And trust me, the reality is way more complex than any film.
It really is. And what's fascinating is how Yammy B dismantles these tropes right from the get-go.
Okay.
Starting with who you think is dangerous behind bars.
Okay.
He says, forget Charles Bronson or Robert Morsley. These guys are products of the system, not masterminds.
Okay, so he's saying a guy who spent decades in solitary confinement. He's not the real danger.
Right.
What does that even mean in a prison context?
It's a crucial question. And it makes us really kind of confront this idea of, we think about danger.
Yeah.
We think about, inherent traits.
Mm-hmm.
But Yammy B seems to be drawing a distinction between inherent danger and the environment's effect on someone's mental state.
So it's like the prison system itself might create these extreme figures.
Potentially, yeah.
Rather than them just being born like bad seeds or whatever.
Exactly.
Heavy stuff.
Yeah.
And speaking of danger, he drops this line, "When two killers meet, no one wins."
Ooh.
Gives me chills just thinking about it. What's the psychological game there?
It's primal, isn't it?
Yeah.
Think of it like almost like two scorpions in a bottle.
Right.
They can't not fight, even if it means mutual destruction.
Wow.
And it's about dominance, yes, but also I think it's about the terrifying prospect of showing weakness in a place where weakness is exploited.
Right. So you do have to be a certain level of hard just to survive. But then, but there's also this intelligence aspect he talks about.
Right.
That story of the guy boasting about his attack plan and how he was going to get this guy back. What was Yammy B getting at there?
I think it's a difference between brute force and strategy.
Okay.
Which is where prison intelligence comes in. And in a pressure cooker like that, every action, every word is loaded with meaning.
Right.
It's about reading the room, gathering information, knowing when to make your move or not.
It's like chess, but with way higher stakes.
Absolutely.
And your reputation is basically your most powerful piece on the board.
Oh, 100%.
Right.
Yeah.
He was saying even the toughest guys back down from someone with a fearsome rep.
Exactly. It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, where the more others believe in your capacity for violence, the less you actually have to use it.
Wow.
But here's the twist. Yammy B hints that this power dynamic is shifting.
Oh, how so?
Well, he starts talking about these postcode gangs.
Yeah, what's the deal with those guys? They sound like a whole different breed.
They kind of are.
Yeah.
Imagine a new generation raised on different codes, loyalties tied to their postcode rather than the old school hierarchy. They're more unpredictable, often more brutal, and that shakes up the entire power structure.
Yeah, he tells this story about a young gang leader who, on the surface, was respectful towards Yammy B, but ultimately this kid's taking orders from his uncle on the outside.
Interesting.
So it's even within the prison walls, there are these external forces at play.
Absolutely. It highlights how much of prison life is still dictated by the outside world.
Right.
Whether it's family ties, gang affiliations, or even just the news filtering in, that external pressure can be incredibly volatile.
Yeah, and for Yammy B, it wasn't just about surviving the physical violence, was it?
Right.
He talks about the mental and emotional toll it takes, even years later.
Yeah, and that's the hidden sentence, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the way that incarceration can fracture someone's sense of self, the trauma, the isolation, the constant fear.
Right.
It doesn't just disappear when you walk out those gates.
It makes you wonder, can someone ever truly leave prison behind?
It's a huge question.
But hold on, before we get too heavy, Yammy B also talks about finding humanity in unexpected places.
He does, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it makes you think about what allows someone to hold on to those bits of hope and humanity in those situations.
Yeah, it's like that saying, you can imprison a man, but you can't imprison his mind. Right?
It's so true.
But there's one story that really stuck with me.
Okay.
Where Yammy B, he gets robbed after he's released.
Yeah.
And he says it was almost a good thing.
Right.
Oh.
And that's where things get really interesting, because for him, it wasn't about enjoying being a victim.
Right.
It was about finally understanding the impact of his own actions.
Right.
The fear and vulnerability that he'd inflicted on others.
So it took being on the receiving end to really get it.
In a way, yeah.
Wow, that's deep stuff.
It is.
And it makes me think about that whole prison intelligence thing again. Because he talks about this story. A guy's boiling cooking oil in the prison kitchen.
Oh, yeah.
And everyone freaks out.
Right, and rightly so.
Right.
Because the context is everything.
Yeah.
Right? Like, in that environment, a seemingly innocuous act like that could mean anything.
Yeah.
It's a great example of how finely tuned prison intelligence has to be.
Right.
You're constantly scanning for threats, interpreting signals, and trying to stay one step ahead.
It's like you always have to be on, right?
Wait.
And this guy, he makes like the classic mistake of announcing his plan to everyone.
Right.
Not exactly a strategic genius, this guy.
Not exactly, no. And it highlights this key point, right?
Yeah.
That information is power, but only when used wisely. Yammy B learned to play the game, throwing out red herrings, manipulating perceptions to keep everyone guessing.
It's giving me serious anxiety just thinking about it.
I can imagine.
Just like always having to be like on edge and...
Right, yeah.
And speaking of manipulation, how much of prison life is just like a giant act?
That's a great question.
Because Yammy B's big on the whole like reputation thing, right?
Yes.
Building that aura of don't mess with me.
Right, because in a world without traditional rules, your reputation becomes your currency, your protection.
Right.
But like you said, it's a delicate dance, you know? Project too much strength, and you become a target.
It's like walking a tightrope.
Exactly.
With a target on your back.
100%, yeah.
And all this talk about like power dynamics and stuff, it makes me wonder, like, how do you even climb that ladder in prison?
That's the thing. It's not always about brute force.
Right.
Yammy B saw firsthand that the real power players were often the ones who understood influence, strategy, negotiation.
Yeah.
The guys who could make things happen without lifting a finger.
The puppet masters.
Exactly.
It's chilling how much psychology goes into it.
It really is, yeah.
He also mentions an incident where he got jumped by a group
Right.
after he got out, too.
Yeah, and as difficult as that experience must have been, it provided him with really valuable insight.
Yeah.
It forced him to confront this reality, that the world outside wasn't so different from the one he had left behind.
It's like he's out, but he's not really free.
Right, exactly.
And he talks about how no one intervened, everyone just watched.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder of the bystander effect, isn't it?
Yeah.
How easy it is to turn a blind eye when we don't feel personally responsible.
It's easier to look away.
It's much easier to look away.
But then he contrasts that with another story.
Okay.
This time he sees, I think it was a young guy being chased.
Right.
And Yammy B steps in, creates a distraction, lets the kid escape.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah, and it's a very powerful example of how, even someone with his past can still choose compassion,
Yeah.
can still act to protect another human being, which speaks volumes about his character.
And maybe, just maybe, about the possibility of change.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like he saw a reflection of his own past
Yeah.
and decided to do something different, you know?
And Kanseki speaks to the power of empathy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
To recognize the humanity in someone else,
Yeah.
even when they're different from us, even when they've made mistakes.
It makes you wonder if those glimpses of compassion are like the real keys to breaking free from that cycle of violence.
Because true strength isn't about dominance or control, is it? It's about the courage to act with kindness, even when faced with darkness.
And that's a powerful message coming from someone like Yammy B.
For sure.
But he's honest about the challenges of leaving that life behind, you know?
Yeah.
He talks about struggling to connect with people, feeling like he missed out on something basic.
Yeah, like he's carrying around this invisible weight,
Yeah.
All those years lost to the system.
Right.
That sense of isolation, that emotional disconnect.
Yeah.
It makes it so much harder to build healthy relationships, to trust, to truly move on.
So it's like he's fighting this battle on two fronts, against the memories of his past and then against the stigma that follows him now.
Absolutely. And it raises such a crucial question for all of us.
Yeah.
What responsibility do we have to support those who have served their time?
Right.
To help them reintegrate into society? Because if we just write them off as, ex-cons, whatever,
Right.
aren't we just perpetuating the cycle?
It's food for thought for sure. Now, I want to circle back to something Yammy B mentioned earlier.
Okay.
The rise of those postcode gangs.
Yeah.
He seemed really concerned about that shift in prison culture.
Because it represents a departure from the established order, right?
Right.
It's like a wild card in an already volatile environment.
Yeah.
And these young guys are driven by different codes, different loyalties.
Yeah. And he was saying they're more ruthless, more prone to violence. It's like they're playing a whole different game.
With even higher stakes.
Right.
Yeah, and the rules of that game are constantly changing.
Yeah.
Which makes it incredibly difficult to navigate,
Right.
even for someone with Yammy B's experience.
He told that story about the young gang leader
Right.
who, like, on the surface, was respectful towards Yammy B.
Yeah.
But ultimately, this kid's answering to his uncle on the outside.
Right.
Oh.
It just highlights how much influence the outside world still has on the inside.
It's crazy. It's a complex ecosystem.
Oh, for sure.
And Yammy B's story gives us a glimpse into those complexities.
It really does.
But ultimately, his story is about more than just prison walls and power struggles,
Yeah,
right?
it's about the choices we make.
Yeah.
The consequences of those choices and the possibility of redemption, even in the darkest of places.
It's a story that challenges us to look beyond the stereotypes,
100%.
to acknowledge the humanity in every individual,
Absolutely.
even those who have made mistakes. So where does that leave us?
I think it leaves us with a sense of responsibility.
Okay.
A responsibility to understand the complexities of the justice system, to advocate for rehabilitation and reintegration,
Right.
and to recognize that even in the darkest of places, there are always glimmers of hope.
And maybe, just maybe, by listening to stories like Yammy B's,
Yeah.
we can start to create a world where those glimmers of hope have a chance to grow into something brighter, something more just...
Hear, hear.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, folks. It's been real.